Part 2, Chapter 11. What Makes Us. Down and up, a deranged spiral held me hostage for a small eternity. I saw nothing, and yet everything. All the seconds that compiled my little life rushed past me at a speed I couldn't comprehend, slapping my form with quips and songs, pleasant remembrance torn away by dire callousness. Back and forth, up turned to down, and the infinite nothing beyond myself grew closer. Then, all at once, I came to the realization that I wasn't falling anymore. I had a body again. Behind my closed eyes was a peeling light. I opened them, but was instantly blinded by a distant white dot staring down at me. I attempted to inhale, but instead, an earthquake of discomfort was sent to every nerve. Wheezing breaths escaped, and a dry blink dragged me closer to consciousness. I moved my legs and arms, feeling the slab beneath me. A small beam of light shined down from the ceiling, illuminating about a 5-foot radius around me. The longer I stared, the more my eyes adjusted, and I could see that the light wasn't a bulb. It was a hole. Hundreds and hundreds of feet above, the light poured in with me in the middle. Outside of this circle was nothing but total darkness and silence. A scrape of stone reverberated for a mile in all directions with every small motion, recoiling back to me and translated into a taunting laughter. A sizzling shiver coated my skin as I continued to stare this high above light. My pupils adjusted, and I refocused on the dark around me. Silence, but not the silence of an empty place. More in the sense of a hunter on the prowl. Deliberate, calculated. My eyes painfully unstuck from their clench, bleary, in contrast blown out. A tight headache ran rampant through my skull as I slowly acclimated to my own body. Groggy, I exhaled. What? Where am I? Each word spoken raced one another to the nearest wall, but was swallowed by the abyss. Each tiny scrape along the ground rebounded and struck me like pebbles, beating me down with repeated noise. My whole body ached in ways I couldn't describe. Annoying, not unbearable. I got to my feet and numbly rotated in place. I stood in a circle of light pouring down from the ceiling far out of reach. The circle of light I stood within kept the sea of engulfing dark at bay. Faintly, I could hear water dripping in the distance. Melodic. Panting lowly, I raised my head as much as I could, but my neck was stiff. I made slow paces around the edge of this circle, out of mind and influenced by some primal curiosity. I didn't feel like myself. Separate, misaligned. Every motion was carried out almost without my will, destined to follow muted guidance if I cannot breach the constraints placed on my mind. I noticed something. My legs moved swiftly, and both arms dangled, influenced by the current of air. They seemed thinner than before, less dense, as did the rest of my body. Continuing another lap, I grabbed my wrist, then my shoulder and waist to confirm. I felt the bone and muscles, starved. The vision of my attacker suddenly jolted my body and nearly caused me to fall over. I caught myself and grabbed my head tight in both hands, whispers tickling my ears. Did I die? I huffed, finding it difficult to exude words. I looked around again and recalled what was revealed to me. The ditch. The place I'm destined to go. Could this be it? My stomach churned at the thought, but potent rejection fought against the very idea that I could be dead. In the background, I noticed what sounded like a heavy door sliding open. I turned my head around and around, trying to find the source of the noise. Only the veil of dark outside of the circle stared back. Infinite. A void. There seemed to be no depth at all, just a sheet. At the same time, it had no end. Alice? I whispered out loud. She did not respond. I don't understand. Memory had failed me. The moments leading up to waking felt like a detached dream. A construct of insanity. Right now, this place was, and forever has been, my residence. So familiar in the most sickening of ways, yet so foreign, like a cheap diorama. I slowly crept toward the edge of the circle and stood there, toes meeting the darkness. Afraid, I took a deep breath. Alice, just rest for now, but not too long, I said as I stepped into the dark. 2 steps in, and I already felt like I was walking toward a cliff. I tried speaking in my head, but found it difficult to narrate. Speaking to myself was fuzzy and backward, merely images projected in reverse. Walking a short distance, I noticed changes in the atmosphere. That and the circle of light was gone from my sight. A cautious 360 turn concluded that I was subsumed by the sea of dark. I could hear my own footsteps echo around me, but the sound seemed to narrow the further I got. My awareness of everything became limited and more confined. I concluded by this that I had wandered into a thin hallway of sorts. This was confirmed as my feet stumbled to the side and my shoulder bumped a wall. I placed my hands on each surface beside me and used that as my guide. It felt mossy, jagged, and at odd slants. Taking my time, I glided forward, following the subtle curves in the walls. It went on, forever. So long that I had to look down to see if my legs were actually moving. After a while, my eyes had adjusted to the darkness as they should, yet I was still unable to see more than a few inches in front of me. It all felt so wrong. This place, my complacence. It was as if I accepted this to be normal, in a way, even though some part of me deep inside was screaming in alarm. I complained, I'd probably be better off walking with my eyes closed. This is ridiculous. How can it be so dark? It was hard to keep my balance for more than a few seconds. I found myself leaning to one side, then slanting forward, just wavering back and forth. This time I leaned a little too far forward, and I bashed my nose into a wall. The inside of my nostrils went cold with pain. I pinched the bridge of my nose and rubbed it up and down to shake off the numbness. I pressed both hands against the wall and felt the barrier, dragging my hand across the stone surface. I followed it to the right, one hand on the wall to guide. Then my hand fell back into the empty air. A new hallway continued to my right, but seemed no different than before. I pressed on down this mysterious corridor, relentlessly moving with confused purpose until my knees started to throb. I don't know how long I've been here. A dream. This is a weird dream. Completely randomly, I caught a glimpse of a faint glow dead ahead. I attempted to focus my vision, but it didn't help. Distrust layered over my optimism, and anxiety set in. The darkness could be playing tricks on me, but I had no choice other than to advance forward. As I drew nearer, the light grew moderately brighter. I finally reached what seemed to be a cracked open door or passageway. The glow, now appearing orange, seemed to be a faint light source pushing out from the small opening. I released a long, tired breath, anticipating potential disaster. I felt my way around and discovered the handle, a cold steel ring located in the expected area. I wrapped 3 fingers through the loop and strained myself trying to pull the door open further. Every inch revealed more of the faint orange spilling into the hallway. For a moment, I thought I heard a light snicker behind me. I turned around, panting and eyeing the corridor that gripped me with shadows. The dim light illuminated only a fraction, revealing nothing to ease my worries. I slowly turned back to the room, but just as the darkness was to my back again, I heard a very low, barely audible giggle. Once more, I whipped around with a spike of fear in my chest. I felt my mouth move, as if to say hello, but caught myself before any air could escape. It was silent, apart from the stress ringing in my ears. I hurried into the room and tried to close the door behind me, but it wouldn't budge. I looked around in this new area, soaking in the claustrophobic nature. 2 torches were slotted into separate wall sconces on the far and close end of the room. One on my right just beside the door, and one in the back left corner. The room itself was about 10 feet long and maybe around 8 feet wide. The walls were made of jagged stone and the floor was smooth as concrete. Above me was a brown, misty void. There was no ceiling, nothing solid to limit my verticality, but whatever ghastly substance swelled above my head was not to be disturbed. Only after staring into the murky air above did I notice thin brown strings dangling, like little hairs cautiously swaying with every one of my movements, magnetically attracted to me. Some opposed. In the room with me was a dirty, overturned bathtub with wilted roses and a significant amount of dry dirt spilling onto the floor. Partially submerged into the ground in the back right corner was a bicycle with training wheels. Its front wheel was swallowed by the floor, and it jutted out of the ground like an abstract art piece. The ground was also littered in shadow shapes, things like toys, dolls, kitchen utensils, and what appeared to be random tools, none of which had a real physical form, just transparent, black, and flickering. Lastly, there was another door. Immediately to my right as I entered, it was rusted steel, decorated with deep scratches and a dozen or so bold, hefty rivets. That door was cracked open nearly an inch, and inside spewed a threatening aura that quickly drove me closer to the opposite wall. I crept through the room, stumbling and falling over my tired feet, avoiding the shadow shapes, until I reached the mounted torch at the far end. I removed it with a cumbersome grunt and lugged it over to the bathtub in the center and jabbed it into the soil to force it upright. Naturally, my eyes lingered on the door. The other torch was mounted just beside it, but the crack allowed no light to pass the frame. I watched the flame flicker while simultaneously enjoying the heat from my personal torch. Now that I had light, I observed my body. Holding my arms out, I could plainly see that the meat and muscle had been sapped right off the bones. My fingers trembled as I lifted my shirt to see my stomach was inverted, ribs exposed. As for clothing, I wore elastic skinny jeans, tennis shoes, and a red short-sleeved shirt. Nothing out of the ordinary. Digging through my pockets, I found nothing at all. "Alice, are you there?" I spoke to the walls, voice dry and husky. There was still no response, no buzz or electric impulse. My skull seemed vacant, as did the rest of my body. "Great. I'm starting to think this isn't some lucid dream." Half sarcasm oozed alongside worry and cynicism. I decided to hold my position for a little bit. Wait, and maybe my brain would break through the fog, or something new might present itself. I kept glancing at these oddities all around me. The tub didn't seem to illuminate as it should, even though the torch was mounted in its dirt. The light didn't reveal any new details of anything scattered on the floor, only dimming their vague outlines. The bicycle occasionally made little groan noises, like the tire was being sucked deeper into the ground, even though it didn't move. I wondered about their relevance, though nothing seemed to trigger any specific memory. That bothered me, like a red-hot gnat in my ear. I knew these things, and they knew me, but I couldn't place them. Still, I waited, hardly able to think and unable to convince myself to move again. Time passed me by, not knowing whether it was day or night, or if those things I once knew even existed here. I was all alone and sat at the edge of the tub, taking minute-long shifts watching the open door and the other alike. The tiny room that confined me was maddening. Innate fear told me this was the only room to ever exist, and all that I knew before was a figment of my fading soul. I debated on leaving, taking the torch with me, but somehow my belly told me that the torch wasn't allowed to leave this room. Neither were. I didn't want to take them. Why would I? It would hurt. It wouldn't be fair to them. My eyes caught the trinkets again, and I felt pity. Sorrow in my stare, and detest in theirs. The longer I sat in morbid silence, the more I started to hear things. Things that certainly didn't exist. Voices of people I knew, but distorted like an analog playback through the world's shittiest radio. These voices weren't just random words and phrases. I recognized them as memories, particular moments. My dad's voice, getting home from the store and smashing the door handle into the wall by mistake. That was one that I easily recognized and could identify. This replayed a memory I had nearly forgotten, printing an image of him standing by the front door with his usual scowl. I smiled. Something else caught my attention amidst my reminiscing. A wave of air pushed into this room, completely silent. I caught a glimpse of the shockwave entering from the door. It passed over me and bounced back like a sonar. The wall of energy sizzled my skin for a brief moment. I perked up, darting my eyes with a stoic expression. Candles. A disembodied voice muttered. I looked to my right, then left, searching. Sudden voices bombarded me by the hundreds. They were soft, hardly existent. I was only able to catch certain phrases or words. Imaginary? What about the others? What others? I whispered without commanding myself to. 3 separate voices responded. I will help you. Medication again? It won't. I will help you. I was forced to reply. To make her. A flash image of my mother stole my vision before burning away. Love me. Demons aren't real. Just a poke, and... The voices changed. The same 3 remained consistent, one after the other, deep and conniving, fearful and concerned, snide, cocky. Come. This has to stop. Sleep forever. Forever, I slurred. Happy birthday to good night, Kiki. My eyes shot open, and my head violently lashed up toward the ceiling. The strings above had grown like vines, twisted and corrupt, reaching for me. They stopped the moment I caught them in my gaze, and slowly, with a wet, dragging sound, returned to the ceiling and vanished among the mist. I was curled up, knees pulled to my chest and my arms wrapped around them tightly, freezing. Looking around, I saw the bathtub and bike were gone. All the little trinkets had disappeared. The torch lay on the floor, still burning next to something new, a little silver box. The licking flame reflected off the spotless metal, and I reached for it with haste. Inside the box, I was surprised to find a single-strike match. Confused, but pleased, I stuck the match in my pocket and made a mental note that it was real, something that could come with me. The song of horror had stopped, and I couldn't remember a thing they were saying. But with the quiet came an innate sense of danger. The walls seemed to swell whenever they were in my peripheral, breathing. A seemingly friendly static cloud twirled in the room, entering and exiting the door every so often, taking a few seconds to tickle me, then disappear. It's almost like it was trying to lift me up and carry me back into the void. Then it was gone, and I forgot it had ever been. But this time, just now, I imagined to be the 10th overall. My arms trembled thinking about the second door in the room. Itchy and dirty. A small cough snuck up on me, then turned quickly to a rough wheezing. I was freezing cold. The torches didn't help, and my weakened body was not taking this environment well. Something was missing. Something that left me feeling undeniably hollow. This unease drenched my skin and left me paranoid, but inexplicably exhausted. I couldn't seem to maintain a steady breathing pattern, and comfort was impossible given my starved body. I begged to rest, just sleep for an hour or 2, but found myself dangling on the edge of unconsciousness. All of a sudden, a harsh sound broke through my senses. I yelped and stood as fast as I could, ready to take action. The torch in my hand acted as a short-range flashlight, but left the hallway and corners black. My heart pounded out of my chest, mouth salivated with fear and anticipation. I waited for another noise. In a few quiet, pondering seconds, I heard a jingle and remained still, placing the memory of the wind chime in the front of my thoughts. Then I heard it again. It wasn't what I thought it to be. This metal was different, denser and heavier. Then a scrape. My breath ceased as my eyes gravitated to the door in the corner. I stared with terror and witnessed the door begin to creep open another inch. Unexpectedly, a low moan erupted within the room. My hands began to tremble as the horrifying cries of the anguished cracked the stone walls and vibrated everything. A childlike dread came over me. Stop. Please stop. I desperately whispered to myself. The moaning increased, growing louder and louder until I felt like I was surrounded by the undead. My ears rang like a cheap alarm clock. My eyes focused on one singular point among the chaos. The torch nearest to the wall had been snuffed. All that was left was a small ember. That entire corner of the room was impervious to my own light, rendering it a mysterious, impenetrable black that vibrated with the earthquake inside my skull. As I stared at the void, I could feel an unexplained pressure build around my eyes. It wasn't apparent at first. However, as soon as I fully noticed, I reached up to rub them. A demonic voice violently shouted. I covered my ears and shrieked. Landing on my side, I curled my knees and dragged myself to the farthest wall, clutching my body tight against it as tears started to roll down my face. All confidence was gone. To my surprise, the moans had begun fading out, receding until they were null. I paused, back against the wall on the floor, waiting with a nauseated face for a new sound, watching both doors, hoping some horrifying creature wouldn't come sprinting in at me. Patiently contemplating, I slowly came to realize the only remaining torch was dimming fast. I quickly directed my eyes to it just in time to watch it spit smoke and die out. Now, both torches were nothing but soft glowing embers, little beads of red and orange. I shuddered. My wrist twitched, silently debating on lighting the match, but ultimately declining my desire. I have to get out of here. I was being hunted but had nowhere to go. Nowhere that was safe for sure. Every step outside this door was a gamble, but every second in here was potentially just as detrimental. I just had to believe there was a way out, a light at the end of one of these hallways, a doorway to my home. The playground. It hit me. I recalled the swing set and that shrouded figure. Whoever it was attacked me, did something to me. Those runes. Either they put me somewhere apart from my own world, or this is some type of trick. This reference to recent events sparked a new motivation. I remembered more of who I was, what Alice injected into me, that pride, that aggression. I started to bolster myself. Enough cowering. I wearily rose and recovered the burnt torch, carried it with me to the doorway, and lay it with glowing embers beneath the frame. Its light may be insignificant, but in these halls, it may be my only beacon if I need to return. A chill ran up my spine, and I turned my head to see the door in arm's reach. The silence coming from that room was unnatural. So quiet, it was practically screaming. I felt no life from within, but could not shake the tragic energy. With regret in each step, I walked out of the room and lingered. The vast nothingness welcomed me again, and I casually peered behind me to watch the dim fire dust on the floor grow smaller. Back at it again, wandering in the empty stone halls I had just recently escaped. I moved cautiously, but with a fierce determination. After 10 or so feet into the dark, I noticed something. My vision was not entirely obscured. I wouldn't say that what I saw was light, but there was a new depth to how far I could see. Almost like a prior smog that hovered in front of my eyes had lessened, but the world didn't change. I think I did. I could see the walls in my peripheral. The hall I walked down varied between 4 feet to 8 feet wide and had an occasional slant to one of either wall. My steps had lost their echo. Each scrape and tap were snuffed the moment the noise was birthed. It was so quiet now, so impossibly empty. Looking back over my shoulder, I saw nothing new, but the second I turned forward, I saw something. A few feet in front of me was a single school locker attached to the right side wall. I paused, staring at it hesitantly before advancing a few steps. I then noticed that above the locker was a light fixture, like what the school had, except this one was dangling from the stone ceiling. I got right underneath the light, with the locker a few inches from my arm. I looked up to see the same strings from that room before. They were gripping the light, protruding from the ceiling through a pinhole of smoke and murky liquid that swirled in place. The light was broken, and splinters of glass crunched underneath my weight only after I noticed its condition. A tap on the metal drew my eyes to the locker. It was rusted and full of random dents. Another tap, more persistent. I reached my hand up to grab the latch and open it, but was interrupted by a slight jolt in my brain. My shoulders raised with an electric touch, and my head whipped back down the hall. Something was telling me not to open this door. My hand lowered, and another tap reverberated from within. I stepped away and continued down the hall, keeping my head turned until the locker was out of sight. I swallowed hard, my mind spinning with questions. Recentering my focus, I found the hallway had changed. It tricked my sense of location, as it now curved like a snake's body, taking me in new, twisted directions, breaking the ember's line of sight. When I wasn't walking into a slanted wall, I tripped over the uneven ground, disoriented and unaware of missing minutes. Wandering blind and unbalanced, my only company was the echo of my own footsteps. Echo, I whispered in realization. It had been very noticeable how my echo had not existed in this particular hall. Now it's back, but seemed delayed somehow. It wasn't true, in the sense that every step was consistently paced, almost like my footsteps were trying to be matched by someone else. I stopped dead in my tracks. Instinct told me I was alone, but everything here was twisted, backward. I freed the restraints of my mind and let it roam free, trying to hear, feel, or smell anything at all. There was an anomaly, barely registered in my senses, but it was there. Up ahead, I felt a difference in the air, a lack of pressure coming from one section of the wall. I placed my left hand on the wall nearest to me, at first to steady myself. Then I followed along some more. The echo was gone. I carefully used the wall as my guide and followed it for a minute or two until my hand slipped off. When this happened, I slowed to a stop and turned my head to the left. In an instant, my shortness of breath had gone. I no longer felt claustrophobic in this never-ending abyss because I could tell that I had found a new room. An open room with much more breathing space. Mixed on whether I should feel happy to find a new room or not, I bit my lip and stared at nothing. The debate began, and I wanted nothing more than to have Alice's opinion. Where is she? I lingered here, recalling the other room and the oddities within. This one was darker than the hall, but felt entirely dead. Another jingle of that heavy metal plucked in the distance, further now. I didn't pay any attention to it. Instead, my legs carried me forward without a thought. Into the room I went, blind to anything within. A horrid stench filled my lungs the moment I stepped under the frame. A prickling stab lashed up and down my body, submerging itself under my skin and remaining in a pocket of flesh beside my heart. It crackled and spurred before ejecting itself through my back and flying out the door. My body lurched forward, falling on my knees and dry heaving at the floor. I loudly expressed my disgust. Then, immediately, a creaking sprouted from the center of the room. Drool connected my lips to the floor as I panted heavily. Hunched forward, gripping my throat, I wearily choked. Who's there? 5 feet in, and my brain now screamed to turn and run. But still, my legs brought me upright, wobbling and queasy. Another fearful step, then one more. It didn't get any easier to ingest the ghastly air. I shifted my lungs to listen, but the very moment I went quiet, I heard a shrill exhale from directly behind me. My heart dropped. I flipped around and saw nothing with my eyes, but I could feel it. An aura of intelligence. Another entity was here. My skin crawled. Along with my own panicked breaths, I started to hear another. They too were moving around, perhaps lost in the dark just like me. Could it be? Alice? I spoke. A reflection, in the middle of the room, set directly on the floor, was a crystal clear reflection. It completely stole my attention and got me to advance a step. The object was small. I couldn't quite make out exactly what it was, but I knew in my heart there was nothing here to cause it to reflect like that. Yet there it was, clearly visible. My feet dragged forward, eyes fixated. A deep gurgle skittered past the doorway behind me, but I ignored it and kept on track. I reached the object, now standing in the assumed center of the room. I bent down to retrieve a single, bloody bullet and held it up close to my face. Overcome by emotion, my empty stare shed tears of remorse in silence. I clutched the relic tight in my palm and took a shaky breath. Dad, I want to go back. Back. A voice prodded in the dark. My brows lowered. Sin, wherever you are, coward, I will find you. I swear. Fate. Another pained gasp slipped through the corridor. My fist wrapped tightly around the bullet until the tip dug into my flesh. I twitched and opened my palm to see the casing emit a faint blue glow. Then it began to shrink in my hand. The gentle blue light lingered beneath the surface, then shot up my arm and disappeared. I smiled, but was immediately taken by the sound of a low, continuous squeal at my back. Turning completely around, I looked in the direction of the door and witnessed something that wasn't there before. I could see the frame I entered, and just beyond that was a completely new door slowly opening a slight amount. I walked towards it. A new feeling beneath my skin gave me the confidence. Warmth. However, I couldn't help but feel like there were 4 or so other people in the room with me. People that didn't want me to leave, but were helpless to stop me. I stepped back into the hall, and immediately a barred gate slid from the ceiling and connected with the floor. I spun around and stared at the metal bars, suddenly constricted by a feeling of loss and missed opportunity. The air became thick again. A low wind rushed behind the bars but could not escape the walls. Instead, it just spiraled, scraping the metal. Kimmy? A tender voice called from the back of the room I was now cut off from. My heart spiked. That voice. My hand snapped to the bars, taking hold of them with tightly bound fists. I pulled myself close to the metal and stared intently into the dark. Tansu? Every ounce of my collected mind was thrown out the window, and I was set into full-on panic mode. I started pulling at the bars, causing them to creak and bang. There was something inside, I'm sure of it. Tansu, are you there? There was no response. Nothing at all. I continued to pull at the gate, but it was useless. My arms ached. My back was throbbing. Then, to my complete and utter dismay, she screamed. She screamed at the top of her lungs, until it was cut short by a bloody gurgle and a hard collapse to the ground. I stopped prying and stared in horror, waiting to see movement or light. My teeth clamored, and I slowly released the gate, backing away. It's not real, I stated fearfully. No, that's not you in there, Ton. I know what your soul feels like. It isn't you. I blinked once, and in that fraction of a second, the gate had vanished. It was just a wall now, like it was always just a wall. I aggressively wiped my eyes and turned again, facing the door that had recently appeared. How many doors? I started. My feet firmly planted themselves at the edge of the second frame, and I pushed the heavy metal inward. It scraped over the stone and buried a grinding slab of angst in my chest. A deep sadness overwhelmed me as a dense mist began to pour from the door. Brown, black, and heavy, it crept along at waist level. Light. A male voice entered my right ear. Dad? It was his voice, but it sounded raspy, tired. This room had magnetic properties, and as I stood here, weakened by everything, I felt the center of the room tugging at me. The mist that rolled pushed out and waded back in like water, but I remained here. I waited again for something to happen. Tansu's scream still echoing in my head, but nothing changed. Nothing moved. Light, I repeated, then curiously retrieved the match. Okay. Kneeling down slowly, I submit to the fog. I held my breath, clutched my nose, and pinched my eyes tight. It was difficult to move my arms while submerged in the smoke, but with extreme effort, I was able to strike the match on the floor and ignite the flame. Close to the fire, I felt clean air. My eyes opened to reveal that the fog was pushed back by the emitted dome of light. Releasing my nose, I took a steady breath and stood up. The fog rolled back to my ankles. The light was nearly blinding to me after this time stuck in the black. Still, even with this, I saw nothing in the room. That is, until the flame left me. Like magic, the fire lifted off the wooden tip of the match and started to freely float to the center of the room. I watched it closely as it hovered over what appeared to be a table and chairs. It lingered at the center and then shot straight down. It was dark again. I took a step closer and the light sprang to life. I blinked and something appeared in front of the dim light. Difficult to make out at first, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. A silhouetted figure sat in a chair, blocking the hovering glow, causing the light to seep around the edges of this person. They were sitting at a table, facing away from me. I took another careful step through the mist, making almost no noise as I moved a few inches in and to the right, trying to get a glance at their face or the light source. I could see it clearly, resting on the center of the table, a candlestick. It was stuck in something, giving off immense heat in the chilled air. The whispers rose again, and with them came goosebumps across my skin. Charged all at once, the figure rotated its head in my direction, stopping at their shoulder. It was me. My body, my hair, but without a face. Completely blank, she ogled in my direction. The whispers started to laugh as a melancholy tune rose from the cracks in the walls. The same strings draped from the ceiling and lashed out again at me, coiling around my hair and pulling. I slapped them away, gasping in fear and trying to retreat, but the mist was so thick I could hardly move. Then suddenly, I heard a metallic scraping come from directly behind me. The door. I whipped my head, wincing in pain as the strings became sharp and thrashed my forehead. The door was closing. I used every ounce of strength my frail body could muster to charge the doorway. The palpable sadness that suffocated me in this room dragged me backward, but I was able to get a hand on the frame and use it as leverage to pull myself out into the hallway. I hit the floor, flipping onto my back. The door continued to slide while I recovered and sat up partway. Looking back into the room, I saw my faceless double waver like a ghost. She was standing there, facing me. I didn't see it before, but it was visible to me now. One leg and one arm on the same side, and a head. That's all she was. A broken husk missing over 3/4 of a full body, hardly able to keep itself upright. Her hair was slightly longer, dark and seemingly wet. In fact, all of her body was dripping some murky black water. I couldn't help but stare as the door slowly crossed my vision. In the background, a fierce expansion and flicker of the delicate candle revealed 3 more shadows sitting around the table.
I'll be here when you're ready,
she sobbed without emotion. Just as the door closed, I was injected with an image of a dark river of stagnant water, and at the river's edge was a cage of some sort, and I was inside it. Silence embraced. In the furthest recesses of my lingering mind, I sensed a clamoring reach, a calling voice, tender yet firm. A distorted shape took hold of me within, inspired by the candlelight and mimic. I felt a sizzling cold embrace my body, and I flattened on the floor, exhausted. I silently fought this, but the hallway around me started to swirl like a draining sink. Bubbles under my skin were almost comforting, as a strange sleep took hold.